fire. Go fight for her man, go die for her man. Cause you only have one life, one chance to do it. One chance to prove it to yourself, so don't lose it. You got this fam, just keep pushing on through it. One day you'll look back so glad you pursued it. Yeah, things are gonna get better real soon. Yeah, I'ma just do me, you just do you. I swear it's gonna get better real soon. Don't let anyone tell you what you should do. I got a clear view. We're gonna make it soon. Just keep pushing through. You're what you got to lose. You're what you got to lose. You're what you got to lose. Just keep pushing through. Cause what you got to lose. 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 Got to lose.
Hello. All right, so this is a test live stream. I am going to try something different. We are not going to be doing anti-apologetics today. We're going to be doing debate analysis today. What's the difference? I don't know. It's my first time doing this. I have no idea how this is going to work. Cheers to Thomas. I'll send out the links once we get going. We're going to be doing from Elimet Frad's channel. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't have any of my stuff to look at when I do these kind of videos. I do about 2 days of research before I actually write a script. And then after I write the script, I do about 2 or 3 days of editing. So we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to raw react, and I'm going to see how smart I am off the top of my head without using all of my books. So let's see how we go. This is Eric Ibarra. This guy, I don't know who he is. I think he's Eastern Orthodox, and I think he's Catholic. I'm not sure. I don't really like this guy, his presentation. I like him. Like, he's a person, but I don't like his channel. I've subscribed and unsubscribed to it multiple times throughout the years. I'm not everyone's cup of tea. He's just not the kind of cup of tea that I go for my analysis. Sona is one of those people who I love everything that he produces. I don't like his content. I don't like watching him because he's really boring. Eric Ibarra is not boring, but he's talking about things that I normally just kind of don't care about. This guy, I don't know anything about. So Eric Ibarra, really good resource, really well-rounded individual when it comes to his knowledge, but not the most entertaining for what I'm looking for. So I'll be very interested to see how he does here. When he was part of Reason and Theology, he did really well because he had a nice balance. It wasn't just all him. Voice of Reason and Eric Ibarra both kind of have the same problem. I think this is the kind of person that Michael Lofton is attracted to. So I'm glad that because Michael Lofton is kind of like out there and they kind of ground him. But without someone to ground, it just comes off a little stale. You know what I'm saying? But that's okay, because you don't have to be exciting to be correct. And Eric Ibarra has a habit of being correct about most things, at least when it comes to religion. So that's good. So I'm hoping and I'm thinking he's probably going to win this debate, but who knows? Maybe he fails miserably. Let's get to it.
Thank you, Matt.
Fabulous to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for making the trip. All right, well, why don't you just spend a couple of minutes introducing yourself, and then we'll get into the debate.
Yeah, so I'm Eric Ibarra, a Catholic apologist. Many people know my material online. I am from Orlando, Florida, married, six boys, and yeah, I have a Patreon account at Classical Christian Thought.
By the way, we're going to do this for about an hour. We're going to try to go 2 hours tonight. We won't get very far in this video, obviously. 2 hours is not a lot. That's maybe 30 minutes. But if there isn't a flow, if it's not exciting, I have 2 alternative videos on my list, including a young lady who's a Catholic, who I thought she was anti-Catholic, but maybe I'm confusing her for a different channel. But I really like her stuff, so I want to just give her a quick shout out right now before we get going. Hold on. To Christ Defender. Her stuff seems pretty interesting, so I am going to be reviewing her stuff. I am going to try to get her on the channel. I don't know if that's going to work. As you can see, I don't always get everyone I invite on to actually come on. There was another video. Where's the other one? And we might be doing some Myth Vision stuff and some God Bless Studio stuff. And I also have Sean McDonald, but that's more like a backup. So those are just backups. I plan on doing this for 2 hours, but we'll see. Like I said, the problem is that Eric Ibadas, even though he's mostly right about things, he's not always exciting in his presentation. So let's see.
And a YouTube channel, Classical Christian Thought. And happy to be here.
Excellent. My name is Denny Sellen. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and
I don't know anything about this guy. He's from Seattle, Washington, but it sounds like he's from England.
I live in Henderson, Nevada. Flew in on, I believe it was Thursday morning, and I'm just one simple electrician who runs his own business. I have 2 daughters and a wife, and I'm charmed to be here.
All right, well, thanks very much. So since Eric is taking the affirmative, you'll have 20 minutes, Eric. Whenever you start, I'll click the timer.
All right. Good. Thank you, Matt, for hosting this debate. Thank you, Ubi, Denny, for accepting. I should begin by briefly defining Vatican I. Vatican I's doctrine of papal government can be boiled down to 3 things. Number 1, Jesus conferred supreme authority to Peter alone. Number 2, the perpetuity of this authority in the Bishop of Rome as the successor of Peter until the end of time. And 3, the nature of this authority as including full power to teach infallibly and to possess immediate, direct, and universal jurisdiction over all Christians. My job today is to prove these 3 things from mutually acceptable sources of Christian history. I'll be immediate, direct, and universal as including full power to teach infallibly and to possess authority in the Bishop of papal government can be boiled down to 3 things. Number 1, Jesus conferred supreme authority to Peter alone.
Peter, what? Conferred?
Down to 3 things. Number 1, Jesus conferred supreme authority to Peter alone.
Jesus conferred supreme authority to Peter alone.
Number 2, the perpetuity of this authority in the Bishop of Rome as the successor of Peter until the end of time.
The perpetuity of confirming the Bishop of Rome in this authority till the end of time.
And 3, the nature of this authority as including full power to teach infallibly and to possess immediate, direct, and universal jurisdiction over all.
Okay, so let's hear that part again.
The end of time. And 3, the nature of this authority as including full power to teach infallibly.
The nature of this authority, including full power to teach
and to possess immediate, direct, and universal jurisdiction over all.
To teach authoritatively and to have direct jurisdiction
all Christians.
Over all Christians.
My job today is to prove these 3 things from mutually acceptable sources of Christian history. I'll be restricting myself to 3 things: the ecumenical councils, the church fathers, venerated by East and West, and the expertise of scholarship, particularly Eastern Orthodox Byzantinists. My opponent, Ubi Petrus, takes the position that the Bishop of Rome indeed had a universal primacy of real power and jurisdiction, but one that is mediated and granted to him by canonical law. When and if a pope appeared to be exercising legitimate authority in the first millennium, Ubi takes it as merely the prerogative that constitutional law gives to the heads of a council. However,
we'll see if that's true.
While it is true that popes often acted as heads of councils,
Hey, Patrick, my Christmas was peaceful, which is more than I can hope for when I'm taking care of someone in the condition my dad's in, so it was good.
This is a reductionism. This will be the crux of our debate. Before diving into the historical sources, let me ask this. What should we be looking for in history? Some think if the papacy is true, history would be filled with examples of absolute and unstoppable papal individualism.
I think that's an overstatement. And playing to the worst, or not lowest, but worst common denominator. Let me see. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate that.
That is, the Pope doing everything himself over and against everybody else. However, Pius IX himself, the Pope who presided over the First Vatican Council, did not believe that this was the logical result. In June of 1871, the year after Vatican I, Pius IX accepted the famous instruction of the Swiss bishops, which made it clear
One
that
of the things I'm also going to try probably next year is I'm going to try doing a co-streams where I'm doing taking on open guests. Since TikTok's going to be banned probably from X, and we'll be airing it here. Kind of doing what Big John's doing, try to get some people to do quick, fast debates and arguments with me. We'll try and do that next year. See if we can build up the channel's popularity a little bit more.
the Pope, both before and after Vatican I, is morally bound to work together with his brother bishops in the government of the Church. When he was head of the CDF, Father Joseph Ratzinger said that the papacy and the episcopate is, quote, reciprocally related and inseparable, close quote. If that is true, that should influence our expectations as to what we should find in history. We should not expect to see papal individualism in the texts of history, but rather a normal conjoining
Papal individualism. Interesting wording.
of Pope and his brother bishops, head and members, with the added detail that the Pope's authority rests upon foundations that clearly display that he was given unique and singular privileges to govern by divine right from Christ through succession from the Apostle Peter. Therefore, simply demonstrating the conciliar or synodal procedure of the Church in the first millennium will not suffice to subtract from my thesis. Now, let's dive into the history. I'll be looking at four things. Number one, the Council of Chalcedon. Number two, the formula of Hormisdas. And number three, the three chapters controversy. And four, a note on the schism between Pope Symmachus and anti-Pope Laurentius.
You see what I'm talking about? It's just not the most exciting. I think unfortunately, him and Sona I don't think would disagree on much. But let's just pretend for the sake of this conversation. I think him and Sona would be the best two people to argue against because they both kind of have the same demeanor and kind of the same presentation. I think Sona does better research, in my opinion, but that's just an opinion. I don't have anything to base that on. But I think it would be interesting to have them disagree on something and to go at it. Speaking of Big John, he said that God is pure act and then brought up the energy. No, John doesn't understand anything. He's arguing for both sides. He's arguing for every Christian position without understanding the Christian positions. When I asked him follow-up questions on the things that he was like trying to poo on me for, he didn't know any of the material. And then he kind of oh yeah, I saw your video on me. So yeah, he's not ready for prime time. He's just good-looking, young, and argumentative. I wish my channel was doing that well. I'm not going to hate on him, but he's not ready for prime time. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's going to lead a lot of people the wrong way.
In the events leading up to Chalcedon, we see a Greek archimandrite, Eutyches, and his synodal accusers appealing to Rome for a verdict
Archimandrite. His pronunciations could be wrong, but he just says it with such confidence that I just feel it's correct.
on apostolic Christology, to which Pope Leo the Great issued his famous tome,
This is
Defining the
fast
Two
forward,
Natures
by
of
the way.
Christ.
He still sounds this slow.
With terminology of papal supremacy, Leo claimed that because Christ made
All right, guys, I know we need to be listening, but I'm gonna jack it up. We're gonna go up to 1.5. If we miss shit, we'll just have to go back to it.
the Apostle Peter to share in his own authority to govern the universal church, the person of Peter's successor inherits immediately divine authorization to bindingly teach the universal church. Leo claimed that his tome was the final word that could not be revised and would serve as the sole condition
So he's going with a letter from Pope Leo.
for saving communion. Long before he obtained the agreement of the whole church at Chalcedon, he wrote, quote, whoever departs from Peter's confession, that is the judgment of Peter's successor, has no part in the mystical building that is the Church of Christ, close quote. Vasily Bolotov, a 19th century Russian Orthodox scholar and a great church historian, according to Father Georges Florovsky,
Is there going to be two Catholics arguing? I thought it was going to be two a Catholic and an Orthodox. Yeah, it is Catholic Orthodox papacy debate. I don't know. I think diving or holding a little too deep to Catholic doctrine might backfire, especially if he doesn't make this kind of mistake, but let's assume that he does, especially if he starts getting too close to the schism or post-schism documents, I don't think the Orthodox bro will accept it.
States that in Leo, quote, all the Roman prerogatives of supremacy are to be found exactly.
Yeah, I like Pine Creek. Maybe Jimbo. I don't know, but I know Pine Creek
As they have been defined by the Council of
on
Latin,
YouTube,
close
over
quote.
YouTube.
Another 20th century Russian Orthodox academic, Archbishop Fyodor Podzivsky, who contributed notable works on the Church Fathers to the Moscow Theological
Well, this is
Academy,
supposed to be a debate, Patrick. So like they're gonna get into it. I'm guessing in the back end, which you probably won't do today, but maybe tomorrow
said that the ecclesiology of Vatican I
if this goes well.
be, quote, deduced from Leo's system by purely logical means, close quote. He also stated that juridical immunity and papal infallibility, while logically deducible in Leo, was manifest in his successors, Pope Gelasius, Hormisdas, and Agatho the Great, each venerated by the
So a respectable Russian Orthodox or Russian bishop claiming that the apostolic succession was immediate, that the authority was immediate. I don't know. I've seen him and Lofton do this before to Ortho Bros, and the Ortho Bros usually break. But I don't know if that's the best strategy. I know it's an effective strategy. I just don't know if it's the way to the truth.
Orthodox Church. The late Olivier Clement, who was professor of church history at the St. Sergius Orthodox Theological Institute, wrote that Leo's tome, In the Thought of Leo, quote, was itself decisive and that the council simply must ratify it, close quote. Clement sees Leo simply echoing his predecessor, Pope Celestine, who reminded the Ecumenical Council of Ephesus that, quote, Christ established Peter as the foundation of the church, close quote, and that, quote, Peter continued to be present in his successors, close quote. The papal legates at that council said Peter, quote, forever both lives and judges in his successors, close quote. That claim was accepted by St. Cyril of Alexandria, the entire council, and should be accepted by both Catholics and Orthodox. Dr. George Demokopoulos, a Greek Orthodox scholar of the patristics, said that Leo held his tome to be the, quote, measuring stick of orthodoxy, close quote. Chalcedon can measure up or do nothing at all. Father Richard Price, the renowned patristic scholar, states that Pope Leo understood his tome to be, quote, totally authoritative. He did not believe his teaching gained any authority by being approved by an ecumenical council, close quote. Not least expressed.
Well, I like the quotes. Someone's personal opinion doesn't make something authoritative on its own.
Expressing his supremacy in doctrine, Leo overturned the sentences against Eastern bishops who were condemned at the Robber Synod of Ephesus in 449. This is followed up by the Council of Chalcedon, wherein the tome of Leo was widely received.
Exercise of power, a little bit more foundational.
By the right-believing bishops of both East and West as the authoritative voice of Peter. This council, from the very first session, accepted the tome as part and parcel of the Church's dogmatic confessions of faith. Not everyone held that view, however. Unfortunately, resistance to the tome and the papacy increased, and new emperors devised an alternative plan to secure peace in the empire. The first strategy was to throw Leo's tome and Chalcedon to the periphery with the imperial edict known as the Henoticon. Chalcedon became either a good option or an obstacle. This was supported by Emperor Zeno and Acacius, the Patriarch of Constantinople.
Do you think he has books on this? Do you think that he does wiki first? What's his first step? I eventually you got to get to a source. I get that. What's your first referencing for all of this? Like I might go to, like on a first, like just long brushstroke, I might go to Wiki and I might go to 2 or 3 of my different history of the popes. And then I try to find some common objections, and I go to find the ecumenical council or the synod that they're talking about and read those documents. And like I'd build a case from there. I wonder how he does it.
Pope St. Felix III,
I'm
on
assuming
the
his
basis
first step isn't Wiki.
of his apostolic auctoritas, issued a universal excommunication of Acacius and all who held communion with him. This started the Acacian Schism in 484 AD. This demonstrates a claim of immediate jurisdiction, since it was a judgment decided by the Pope and resting upon his singular apostolic authority in St. Peter. Pope St. Gelasius defended the singular right of the Roman pontiff to issue such a condemnation on the grounds of his immediate commission from Christ through
Yeah, but I mean, a first attempt at exercising the power and it getting some pushback while others might assent to it, especially so late. And I know calling 400 late is, I don't like calling 400 late. I call anything 400, 500 and early, I call it early. But let's just go with how some scholars talk that say 400 is late, 500 is late. An attempt at exercising the power isn't a demonstration that the power is recognized.
Peter. The world-renowned Greek Byzantinist Milton Anastas sums up the Roman view in the thought of Pope St. Gelasius. Quote, believing that Christ had delegated to the See of Rome supreme authority over the whole church with power to govern in all questions concerning doctrine and discipline, Gelasius held, says Anastas, the Pope on his own initiative could make decisions binding upon the entire church without recourse to a council, for in his judgment the See of Rome constituted the highest tribunal in the Christian church. Its decisions were irreversible and itself could not be judged by anyone. Close quote.
Check it out.
Milton Anastas received his PhD in history from Harvard University and was a prestigious professor.
I hate credentialism. So you were starting to get me on your side, and then you went to credentialism, and now I don't give a crap. So that was a mistake. Just right there. I don't care if he went to Harvard. I don't care if he went to Yale. I don't care if he went to his local community college. I don't care if he's just some scholar, some literati who just loves reading books in his basement. I don't give a crap. That's not relevant to anything.
Professor of classics and Byzantine history. While many Greeks in the East were questioning Chalcedon at this time, Rome held firm to its classical narrative. Pope St. Simplicius, venerated by the Eastern Orthodox, wrote to the Emperor Zeno that the pure Christian faith permanently, per stat in the Latin, remains, quote, in the successors of Peter, upon whom the Lord imposed the care of the whole sheepfold, whom he promised he would not fail even to the end of the world, close quote. To heal the Eastern schism, a new pope, Hormisdas, drew up a formula, or a libellus. The terms were, among other things, irrevocable assent to Leo's tome and the removal of certain names from liturgical commemoration, especially Acacius.
No, he's really, really trying to connect it to Leo's tome. I don't think you should put all your eggs in one basket, even in a good debate. What?
More importantly, in this formula, he echoes his predecessor, Simplicius. It was professed in the formula that the Christian religion always remains pure in Rome because of a permanent promise made by Christ to build his church upon Peter. Consequently,
but why couldn't you make that argument then about, I lost the word, Antioch? Why couldn't you make the same argument about Antioch, since Pope Peter founded both? I think it's the uniqueness of both Peter and Paul being martyred in Rome that gives Rome special precedence. You have the apostle to the Jews, you have the apostle to the Gentiles being martyred in the same city and having leadership roles when done so. I think that's a much more powerful statement than a later document.
Unity with the Roman See was indistinguishable from unity with the church. Commenting on the Petrine contents of the formula, the Orthodox theologian Father Alexander Schmemann said, quote, the whole essence of the papal claims cannot be more clearly expressed than in this libellous document, which was imposed upon the Eastern bishops, close quote. In Oxford Press' most recent monograph on Byzantine history by Greek historian and classic
monograph
Professor Anthony Kaldelis, he states the following, quote, for the East to return to
so erudite
communion with Rome, all its bishops must submit to the Pope, close quote, speaking about the formula for Mistas. Kaldelis calls the formula a binding document that affirms, quote, Rome's supremacy over the church, close quote, requiring, quote, obedience to the supreme pontiff and the universal Pope, close quote. Another Greek Orthodox Byzantinist, Peter Charonis, says, quote, acceptance of this formula meant, of course, absolute submission to the Pope, close quote. Dr. Joseph P. Farrell.
Absolute submission to the Pope. Yes, this is Tom Patrick. Yes, this is. This is the most recent debate. I'm doing an actual debate analysis right now. This is what I do when I'm, except I do it at much slower speed. I do this, and I usually have my books out while I'm listening to it, and I'll do research while they're talking about things to see what they're saying works or doesn't work. I'm just trying a new thing. I want to see if I want to go in a different direction with my live streams. Anti-apologetics is fun, but while my channel is growing, it's not growing as fast as I would like it to. And my most popular content on my channel are my debate reviews. I want to see if I can do it live. I don't know if I have the knowledge base to do it live, but let's see.
Author of the multi-volume God, History, and Dialectic, writes that the formula of Hormisdas, quote, demanded the complete submission of the Eastern Church to the papacy, close quote. Volker Menz, a medievalist and perhaps the foremost Chalcedonian scholar today, writes, quote, the libellus begins with Matthew 16, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. In other words, since Rome was regarded as the see of Peter, on Rome the church was built.
But then you have to ask, why not Antioch? You're leaving a little dangling carrot. I don't know if you're doing this to set up a trap for your opponent to fall into, or if you have a blind spot because of your pro-papacy perspective.
On this ideological foundation, the libellus claims not only the papacy to be in the apostolic succession since the time of the apostles, but also to be instituted by Christ himself according to the New Testament, close quote. Elsewhere, Menz claims that the formula of Hormisdas, quote, required every bishop to accept the papal view on the Christian church, past and faith, close quote. Dr. Claire Sontenal, the renowned patristic scholar, writes the following for the Cambridge Companion to the Age of Justinian, quote, for the Pope, the union meant that the new emperor fully accepted Roman authority in all ecclesiastical.
Also, if all he's doing is reading pro-patristic writings, that could influence his perspective. Yeah.
Ecclesiastical matters,
his own
disciplinary as well as doctrinal, close quote. In his Princeton monograph on Western authority, the Anglican priest scholar Carl F. Morrison states that the formula equated Roman communion and communion with Christ as, quote, identical, close quote. And that's precisely the case. Hormisdas was not merely speaking to the past, but also to the future, requiring all the subscribers to avoid the communion of anybody who would deviate from Rome, even in the future.
No, because with my aunt, Patrick is asking if trying this new approach out. One, I'm just testing it. I just want to see if this does better. I might do this one. I might do 2 or 3 if this goes well. So far, it seems to be going okay. See if it draws in an audience. See if people come into it. But I'm already doing anti-apologetics. I'm already commenting on every single religion I've gone to. In fact, next week I'm going to do some Muslim stuff. We're going to do Muslim week again. Or at least Muslim day. We'll do at least one day of Muslim stuff. But I've already hit all the major religions at least twice. While I'm enjoying the audience that I'm getting, anti-apologetics and debate reviewing is kind of connected because you're debunking fallacies. It's just with the anti-apologetic stuff, I'm a little bit more crude and a little bit more blunt, and I'm having more fun. With the debate review stuff, I'm being a little bit more analytical and using more logic and resources. The only thing is that doing it live, I can't just stop the stream and go look something up for like an hour or 2. So that's the difference.
And yet it was accepted by all Easterners who came into unity with Rome. Pope Hormisdas' son, who later became Pope St. Silverius, wrote this in the epitaph for his...
Like I said, I'm also going to try doing some live debate stuff where I just have an open stream and people just come in to debate me. I'm going to try that as well. I'm just going to try some different stuff, see how it catches on.
Father, quote,
and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At least you tried it, right?
Defeated by holy power, submitted herself unto you, happy in having regained her lost faith, close quote. The nephew of Pope Vigilius, the Roman deacon Rusticus, records that 2,500 Eastern clergy signed the formula of Hormisdas. This shows that no matter what resistance...
I mean, that's kind of a fair point, but it seems very obscure.
There was to papal authority or Leo's tome in the decades preceding, the resolution to the schism in the formula of Hormisdas involved a triumph of the primitive Roman view of the papacy.
Is Leo the right way to go, or would Clement, but trying to prove that Clement's writings were legit and trying to prove that Clement was actually a pope might be a little problematic. You could go with Peter, but again, you have to then prove that 1 Peter and 2 Peter are authentic and not synonymous. Pseudonymous?
The net result is that the antique theory of Petrine supremacy upheld by Rome had become, at least at this moment, externally received by both Chalcedonian East and West in 519 AD. Now, the 3 chapters controversy. Here we see Emperor Justinian seeking to circumvent the rules of the church in order to enforce his own edicts to secure peace in the empire. However, despite his attempt to use an ecumenical council without the Bishop of Rome, he ended up cornering himself into an admission that the papacy is required for...
Also, Patrick, this was my next review, was going to be this one. But since I have some important stuff coming up, I'm not going to have time to do the normal review stuff. And this is so long, and this would require so much research that doing it as a live stream, it just seems more efficient.
Any doctrine or discipline to be ratified on a universally binding level. Pope Vigilius, despite his vacillations, ended up carving out another instance of papal supremacy in the midst of Oriental chaos. The Byzantine story on Vigilius is one of sainthood.
But the fact you have to admit that he's carving it out seems to me an admission of at least development, which I've watched you before. I don't think you deny development. But I think you're planting the seed too late if you're using Leo. I really do think that's I think 400 is just too late.
And divine supremacy. Lastly, during the midst of the...
Most people who I know who are at least educated on the topic, but still don't give authentic authority to either the Church of Rome or the Papacy. Most of them will argue that the church started sometime in 325, 320, 300 earliest. So pushing it to 400 doesn't hurt their arguments. So it really depends on how your interlocutor here is going to counter you.
The occasion
all of
schism.
this could be irrelevant. If he's saying that the church started at 300 and you're using stuff that's all post 400, well, it doesn't really matter, because then everything you just said is irrelevant. Because he'll admit to that and it doesn't change his argument. So you're assuming a lot.
A local dispute in Rome showcases the emergence of the claim that the Pope can be judged by no one.
I'm guessing he watched this material beforehand and just is going with what he's heard off his channel, this other guy's channel.
A principle accepted by many saints revered by the Orthodox Church. The dispute involved a rivalry to the papal throne between a certain Laurentius versus Pope St.
Patrick says that I was interested in this when I first heard they were debating, but then when I heard how narrow the topic was, I was disappointed. Like I said, I've heard Ibarra debate before. I've heard Ibarra make presentations. I've subbed and unsubbed from his channel many times. He's just very dry and erudite and overly narrowly focused on what he considers proper proof texts. If someone thinks that the church is lying, or that the church is, or anything the church says is discredited and propaganda, then it doesn't matter how many church documents you pull out. You need to pull a document from outside of the church to say it. And I know that right now he's trying to pull from some Greek Orthodox, or for some Orthodox writings, Eastern Orthodox writings, Russian Orthodox writings. But if you go far enough back in church history, especially if you go pre-schism, it's all the Catholic Church. Even if it's East, even if it's in the West, I'm saying West, even if it's in the East, it's still the Catholic Church. So, you know, it's like when we're trying to mince words or slice hairs with John Christensen. John Christensen is still part of the Universal Church. You need to go post-schism if you want to make these admittances hit harder.
St. Symmachus. Among other things, the driving force behind the resolution to this Roman schism was that even if the Roman pontiff were guilty of certain crimes, he cannot be judged by any earthly inferior, ecclesiastical or secular, precisely because he occupies the authoritative position that Jesus Christ gave to St. Peter, the head of the Universal Church. Multiple saints, including Pope Symmachus himself, Pope Hormisdas, who was a deacon notary at the councils that formulated the principle that the first see is judged by no one, Saint Enodius of Pavia, Saint Avitus of Milevis, and Saint Laurentius of Milan, all testified to this. A century later, Pope Saint Gregory the Great, known by the Greeks as the Dialogist, spoke in
I feel like he should be including dates here, and the fact that he's not makes it a little bit harder to track. So if you were doing an analysis like I normally do, we'd have to go and verify the dates and verify the time and see how everything plays together. So he's also assuming a level of knowledge on his interlocutor's part that he can play with, and we just saw in the last two debates with Alex O'Connor, when you have two people of very distant intellects and knowledge bases, the conversation goes nowhere because the other person can't play the same game you're playing, and they don't know the rules. They don't know anything. So it's like a pro or college league baseball player going to a little league t-ball game. Yeah, you're going to hit them all out of the park, but the kids can't play. Like the kids can't do nothing. So it's not that it's unfair. That's a different issue. It's that it's a different game altogether.
favor of Samakus' side of this dispute, showing his own belief in the principle, the first see is judged by none.
Or a pro football player going to play, flag football with junior high kids. Like the junior high kids are going to get slaughtered, dude. Like it's just...
In conclusion, we see councils, saints, and academic scholarship testify to the manifestation of Petrine authority over all Christians, its post-apostolic perpetuity in the Roman See, and its divine protection by Christ in virtue of his promise to St. Peter the Apostle. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much.
So, breakdown of that. I like all of his points. I definitely like the sources that he's going to. As a Catholic, I already agree with those sources. So that's fine. The problem here is that does the opponent even respect these sources or consider these sources valid? If he does, are the dates relevant to the conversation that's being had? And number three, there's no meat. How can I put it? There's all meat and no flavor here. There's no spice. There's no sauce. There's no salt. I don't see how someone watching this from the outside would find this interesting. So those are my initial thoughts on Ibarra's performance. But let's go to the other guy.
Much, Eric.
Very lovely.
Ubi, you have 20 minutes for your opening statement. Whenever you begin, I'll click the timer.
Am I close enough?
Yep.
Okay. Papal primacy is not our issue, as we agree the Pope was a first and presided in love, that he was an archbishop.
Right there. What did I say? What did I say in the earlier analysis of Ibarra's thing? Is that all this guy has to do is say, okay, I'm cool with that. And there goes the whole argument. He was basing all of his stuff on Leo's tome. If this guy dates his beginning of the church to before Leo's tome, before everything that Ibarra was citing, all of Ibarra's points are moot, even if they're valid.
Bishop of the world, nor is papal supremacy our issue, as we agree the Pope was the highest, most supreme bishop, who in fulfilling the role as a synodal head was required to either ratify or reject the decisions of the synods at which he presided, and so his
Two of Ibarra's arguments now made irrelevant.
relationship to the patriarchs was mirrored in the relationship of a patriarch to the archbishops, an archbishop to the metropolitans, and a metropolitan to the bishops, hence the oft-used address for the Pope in the first millennium, Archbishop of the world. That was used repeatedly, specifically at Chalcedon.
We had Chalcedon. I don't know if Pope Leo predates Chalcedon or not, but Chalcedon's pretty early. So,
in the canonical literature, it is abundantly clear that the relationship between each grade of episcopal authority is a mirror of the relationship below it and or above it. We go over this for roughly 45 minutes in our very first video responding to the arguments of Eric Ibarra from May 2020. What we do...
not looking good. Not looking good. I'm on Ibarra's side, by the way. I'm a Catholic. So it's not looking good.
Object to is the Vatican I model of a dictator who can speak infallibly as he pleases with no...
Listen to the way that he's talking, too. Just more excitement. A little bit more...
recourse to any council or any institution, whose whims can become incontestable decrees, as we recently saw with the Latin Mass, which sadly is once again being decimated. But that is a position...
See, it says Catholic Orthodox. He sounds very Catholic, traditional Catholic. So let's see.
You must prove existed in the first millennium.
I don't know enough about this guy, so just to be... I know Eric Ibarra. I don't know anything about this dude.
even the Pope's handpicked scholars do not believe existed then, as we've seen from the Ravenna document, also from Chieti, also from Alexandria. Further, you bear the double burden of providing evidence that the Pope could and did speak infallibly on matters of faith and morals, with the intent to bind the faithful without the cooperation of his fellow bishops.
There's a key point. Even if he could, did he before the declarations that he could? There could be some lacking evidence here.
It is not enough for you to show that in his role as the head of the Roman Synod, he issued excommunications and anathemas, as that is normal in a federation of churches. And that is exactly what the First Millennium Church did. They were a federation of churches, and many patriarchs and archbishops availed themselves of such a privilege, cutting off from their synodal communion all those who refused to.
If I'm Ibarra, I'm thinking we're going to go to the Council of Nicaea, and we're going to go to the Council of Chalcedon, and we're going to show, and the synods in between, and we're going to show where the councils affirmed the supremacy, or at least the authority of Rome. That's what I think, or that's where I would go if I was Eric. But Eric has such an esoteric and, I don't know, I don't want to say encyclopedic because that's kind of a over exaggeration, but let's say Wikipedic. No, just kidding. But he has a really good knowledge of papal documents. Maybe he's going to go to a papal document, but it feels like he set up the board, the chessboard, all wrong. So if you ever watch those videos where like it's an adult woman playing a teenage boy on chess, and the teenage boy doesn't move, but she already knows it's the wrong move, so she just lets him play it out, and then he loses, but he's the one defeating himself. That's what it feels like. It feels like Eric set up the board wrong, and his first move was the wrong move. So even if everything else is right, this dude is already, like, he already sees where it's going, so he already has his counters ready.
Comply. A prime example of this is a situation involving St. John Chrysostom and the Patriarch of Alexandria, St. Theophilus.
Oh, I brought that up earlier. I brought that up.
Which created a schism with Rome and was only healed under St. Cyril.
I didn't bring up Cyril. I did bring up John Chrysostom. That's not a death knell for you about his argument, though, because you have, okay, so you have a later, you have an issue being solved by a later church father, but that doesn't mean that the authority of the Pope or the authority of the church is being questioned here, because they would still have to affirm whatever the solution was for it to be official.
But on the topic of infallibility, when the Council of Chalcedon critically examined the tome of Pope St. Leo, they used the councils of Nicaea and Ephesus as the standard. Had the tome been understood as ex cathedra, this type of behavior would have been unthinkable, as it would have already been considered dogma. But when one reads the pages upon pages of the bishops critically examining it, one cannot help but realize they had no
That's a mistake. That's his first mistake. He's jumping the gun, and he's having a misunderstanding of how dogma develops into dogma. Well, what is dogma is always dogma. We don't know what it is till we discover it. So there's a little cart before the horse happening here, a little anachronistic Protestant-ish type mistake going on here. I don't think he's about to pull a Dinesh or a Cliff. I don't think so. His opening was too strong already, but interesting.
Concept of the tome as being ex cathedra, nor did St. Leo for that matter, because in letter 120, he states the Council of Chalcedon, quote, ratified his tome, and that it has been, quote, received by the judgment of the whole Christian world, end quote. Furthermore, when Bishop Vincent Gasser, at the behest of Pope Pius IX,
Eric Ibarra has another opening here, though, because part of the way that doctrine becomes dogma is that the body Catholic, meaning the regular, the common magisterium, not not the extraordinary magisterium. Maybe I have it backwards. But anyway, not the magisterium as in the popes, but the actual lay people and the parents and the priest have to not reject the teaching. So the body of Christ cannot reject the teaching. I think Ibarra can counter that if he words it properly. Not the way I just
wrote the
did.
official interpretation of Pastor Aeternus, known as the Relatio of Bishop Gasser. He did not include the tome in his examples when trying to prove papal infallibility in the first millennium. Yes, St. Flavian did say that all it would take is a letter from St. Leo to cure the situation, with Eutyches, that is. But that is because Eutyches himself says that is what will make him change his mind, not any commitment on the part of the Church of Constantinople. In other words, the tremendously influential person, that being Eutyches, was actually the godparent of one of the chief eunuchs and very influential. The person who was causing all of the problems announced they would listen to whatever Leo told them. Of course, Eutyches only said that because he thought Leo would agree with him. When St. Leo did not, Eutyches immediately went to the Patriarch of Alexandria, Dioscorus. It's worth noting that Eutyches actually appealed to Alexandria and as well to other sees. But this is where.
So for those that don't know the history, there is a power. I'm assuming he's talking about the patriarchate and not an individual. There's a power struggle between Alexandria, Corinth, and Rome. Surprisingly, not a power struggle between Jerusalem and Antioch, which is where you think the power struggle would be. No, it's these other players that have become important players that you see some struggles here.
There's a revealing quotation from St. Leo's letter 14, section 12, in which he roots the primacy at every episcopal level to the distinction between St. Peter and the other apostles. He draws a parallel between the role of a metropolitan among the bishops, an archbishop among the metropolitans, and the pope among the archbishops. Quote, and again, this is letter 14, section 12. And though they have a common dignity, yet they did not have uniform rank, inasmuch as even among the blessed apostles, notwithstanding the similarity of their honorable estate, there was a certain distinction of power, and while the election of them all was equal, yet it was given to one to take the lead of the first, from which model has arisen a distinction among bishops also. And by an important ordinance it has been provided that everyone should not claim everything for himself, but that there should be in each province one whose opinions should have the priority among the brethren. And again, that certain whose appointment is in the greater cities should undertake a fuller responsibility, through whom the care of the universal church should converge towards Peter's one seat, and nothing anywhere should be separated from its head. Letter 1412. We know
Between Peter's one seat. In his chosen passage, there is a seed for his defeat. There's a defeater in there.
know from canonical literature what the rights of bishops, metropolitans, and archbishops were, and St. Leo is drawing a parallel between those and the role of the papacy. So we have a very good idea of what St. Leo saw as a pope's role, and it was not Vatican I, but conciliar ecclesiology, as the Orthodox Church teaches to this day. Further, St. Leo states that the higher-ups, quote, their opinion should have the priority among the brethren. Notice it's priority, not autocracy. His vision is essentially that of Apostolic Canon 34 on the
But
universal...
see, that's if you watched any of these kind of debates before, most of the ortho bros do not deny papal authority. They deny papal supremacy. And they view the actions of the Pope, specifically after the Filioque, as him taking it's not univocal. Darn it, Dan. It's unilateral action without the consent of the other patriarchs as the problem.
level, which states that the head of the synod and the members should do everything in concert, not one alone. Moving on to Pope St. Felix III, which you brought up in your introduction, it is often pointed out that St. Felix excommunicated blessed Acacius of Constantinople, and that is true. But far from exercising some sort of Vatican I prerogative, as you would imagine, or as you would argue, his successor, Pope St. Galasius, states in letter 10.4 that Pope Felix did what any bishop could do in choosing to excommunicate a bishop who failed to uphold the Council of Chalcedon. Quote, does Euphemius not realize that Acacius was condemned according to the formula of the Synod of Chalcedon? It is permissible not only for an apostolic leader, but for every pontiff to separate from Catholic communion whomsoever they like and whatever place they like, according to the rule of the very heresy that has previously been condemned. Letter 10.4 of St. Galasius. In letter 12.8, St. Galasius makes the same claim in regard to the heretics Timothy, Peter, and Peter of Antioch, and again in letter 27.3. This is because the great St. Gelasius, far from seeing himself as an unlimited autocrat of Vatican I, understands his role as a ratifier of proposed universal synodal decisions. In fact, in letter 1.3, St. Gelasius shows he believes the episcopacy is the highest office in the church, meaning that any office presumed to be above it can work only through the synodal model and is not an autocracy. Quote, beyond the presbyterate, what is more important to the governance of the church, if not the episcopate? In letters 1.1, 1.9, 10.4...
Yeah, but again, he's wording it tricky. Yeah, I mean, I think both my observations here and I think this dude's objections fit in well with the conversation. I think he's a little bit more tied in or locked in than Ibarra is. I think Ibarra was kind of shotgunning a little bit.
4 through 5, 10.9, and 27.4 through 5, we see St. Gelasius stressing that because Rome is a synodal head, those synodal decisions that have been ratified by his predecessors have been made permanent and can only be undone via the synodal process, with St. Gelasius or his successors ratifying the decision. For St. Gelasius, as for the other popes, especially St. Leo, Rome's role was analogous to that of a keystone in an arch. The keystone was put in as the crowning and last piece, once the rest of the arch had been constructed. So while a keystone on its own did not make an arch, without a keystone, no arch could exist. It's just synodal ecclesiology. Now, in letters 1.38 through 39, St. Gelasius even laments that he might be judged by the church for receiving heretics into communion, and he stands in stark contrast to the claims made concerning Pope St. Symmachus, which we cover in our video entitled Papal Forgeries. But
Papal forgeries. I brought that up earlier also. So you have to authenticate the documents that you're referencing, which I think Ibarra doesn't. I think Ibarra just kind of, if the church says it's true, it's true, and so we're not going to second guess whether the document is real or not. I think he does a little bit of that. He does acknowledge controversies, by the way. I'm not saying he doesn't do that, but he'll still side with whatever the church rules, as we have to, as Catholics.
Avitus of Vienna and Ennodius of Pavia are stating that the Bishop of Rome cannot be judged, but the context of those two quotations, as well as the statements made by Pope St. Gelasius and much later by Pope Innocent III, as well as the depositions of one of Symmachus' successors, Silverius, and the events surrounding the Fifth Ecumenical Council, it becomes clear that St. Avitus and St. Ennodius, were speaking on moral failings, not heresy, which in and of itself is suspect enough, since St. Symmachus was on trial for supposedly having an affair with a nun.
A pope doing evil things or sinning does not disqualify him or make any of his statements non-infallible, if he even made infallible statements. And it does make it unauthoritative. To be really gross about it, a president can get a BJ from a intern and still declare war. So this is kind of a red herring. But it's also just in the list of normal objections to papal authority. Oh, well, the Pope can do evil things, so therefore, how can he be authoritative? Or, oh, the Pope can be wrong about such and such a thing. How can he make ex cathedra statements or infallible statements if he can be wrong about other things? These are equivocations, and they're not the same.
Now, with St. Agapetus, on the topic of him, there's really nothing special about a pope leading a council in Constantinople that condemns not a patriarch, but a patriarch who had resigned sometime previously. This is merely a synodal act, not the type of Vatican I autocracy you need to prove. And Pope Silverius was deposed and exiled. He was actually deposed and exiled. But when Emperor St. Justinian heard of this, he demanded Silverius be sent back and be given a proper trial. Instead, though, he was handed over to Pope Vigilius, who exiled him and allowed him to starve to death. Again, not a peep was heard that the Pope couldn't be judged. And even if we were to argue that Vigilius being the Pope could judge Silverius, it begs the question of how Vigilius could be a valid Pope if an invalidly deposed Pope was still alive, meaning that Vigilius would still have been a non-Pope judging a Pope. On the topic of St.
No, that's completely untrue. For instance, there's 2 living popes right now, and only one's authoritative. There's only one true pope, and the other one ends up being a false pope or anti-pope, however you want to think about it. But there's only one line of succession and only one authority at a time. So no, think about it this way: Trump was president, Biden was president. Trump didn't have any power. Now Trump will be president again, and he'll have power again. That doesn't mean that Biden wasn't president on the interim. So. Again, this is on a list. He's making kind of knee-jerk arguments against the papacy that have been around forever that aren't very good. He's just including them in. Basically, these are just setups for Ibarra to knock down because he knows that Ibarra can knock these down. But this is kind of like, if you go back to the Cliff Alex debate and even the interview beforehand, sometimes it's just the interlocutor setting them up to see what level his opponent is actually at before he starts arguing with him. And I did this with Big John. So with Big John, I asked him higher level questions. So I started off at a very easy level, and I just kind of was asking questions until he got to a point that he couldn't answer. And that's how I figured out how low his information base was. Patrick is saying, when you use the term ortho, do you use it in a general term for Orthodox online, or do you also use the pejorative sense, Orthodox versions, tractate extremist? No, I just mean it in general, or I use Orthodox to mean Orthodox. The ortho bros are the debate bros. I'm thinking here Jay Dyer, and other guys like that. I'm assuming he's in the same group because that's the most vocal group online. I don't know that he is, but I was a debate bro. I was involved in internet online blood sports. That's what I was doing with my channel when I was not creating content. I would go onto other people's, usually anti-theist channels, and we would just debate like crazy and yell at each other. I made some of my best friends, online friends. I'm going to be clear, not like real life friends, but some of my best online friends, like B.S. Lewis and all of them. I made them through that. So when I say it, I'm not being pejorative. It's just what we usually called each other. If that's offensive, I'm not trying to be. I don't have a problem being offensive. I want to be very clear. I call radical traditionalists. I call them rad trads in an offensive way. When I'm calling Tyler Marshall a radical traditionalist, when I'm saying that Brian Halters is throwing red meat to rad trads, I'm trying to be offensive. I am saying that they're doing something wrong. Me calling him an ortho bro is not me being offensive. They're bros. They're not doing the best research. They're being a little sloppy with their presentation because they know the material so well. They're not doing extra research to verify what they're saying because they've said it so often. They're just trusting their history, which is what I sometimes do when I'm debating. So I don't mean it pejoratively when I'm saying that.
Hormisdas. The gem in any pop apologetics quote mine is going to be the libellus of Hormisdas, due to two lines in particular. Quote, in the Apostolic See, the Catholic religion has always been preserved without blemish, end quote, end quote. And
also, the old blood sports and shit posters and bros, and debate bros, we're all old now. 10 years ago, we were young. We were like in our late 20s, early 30s. 10 years later, we're all in our, early 40s, mid 40s. So yeah, we aged badly, but so did new atheism. So what are you going to do?
Quote, in which the firmness of the Christian religion is whole and true. It's rarely acknowledged, and in your book you simply denied that other versions of the libellus existed, and I found that claim to be preposterous, as is well documented in the primary source.
Let's go back. I didn't catch that.
And, quote, in which the firmness of the Christian religion is whole and true. It's rarely acknowledged, and in your book you simply denied that other versions of the libellus existed, and I found
Other versions of the libellus existed.
that claim to be preposterous, as is well documented in the primary sources, even by St. Hormisdas and his emissaries. Quote, and this is a suggestio, meaning a report, written to St. Hormisdas from Dioscorus.
And this is a mistake that a lot of people make on all sides, is that they refuse to acknowledge material that works against them. Even if you don't agree with that material, or you think there's a reason why it should be falsified or at least rejected, you need to at least acknowledge it.
The deacon. After much negotiation, when they, the Archimandrites too, were won over by arguments, they presented libelli by all kinds and methods. Further, St. Hormisdas, in his letter to the Ecumenical Patriarch Epiphanius of Constantinople, writes, quote, also let the contents of the libelli which they have presented be included in your report, end quote. He later continues, and since in your letter your love has made mention of the Jerusalemites, whose recent profession was reported to us, we considered it necessary either to review what was written or to indicate what was agreeable. None of those three quotations above make any sense if there was only one form of the libellus, and the evidence indicates that the vast majority of those who signed did not sign the libellus, but rather a libellus. They themselves compose independently. We even have one from the bunch of monks from Lebanon. But what follows the last quotation is a several paragraph long outline written by St. Hormisdas on what the libelli being offered to him must be composed of, and it consists of teachings on the Trinity, a focus on Christology, and even some Mariology, but no mention of the supposed papal claims in the initial libellus. In fact, St. Peter is not even mentioned in the outline that he gives. Assuming St. Hormisdas had been insistent on papal claims in the first libellus, why would he suddenly omit those as required in future libelli unless he himself saw them as the irrelevant rhetoric that they really were, just chest-pounding? The issue is really that you guys latch onto the term always, and you assume that always means every single time. But when we look at quotations from other writers from the same period, we find absolute terms like always and never, in every way, at all times, when used to describe historical events, are usually used in the same way it is in English, and that means generally speaking, or tends to. Case in point, most of the bishops present at Chalcedon had been involved in a schism with Rome over Ephesus II in 449 that lasted until the summer prior to Chalcedon in autumn 451. And they wrote to St. Leo concerning Canon 28, this will show also due regard for the pious emperors who have confirmed as law the judgment of your sacredness, and the see of Constantinople will receive its recompense for having always shown you great ardor in the cause of piety, and for having zealously allied itself with you for the sake of harmony. Never mind that only months before they had not been in communion with Rome. They had always shown St. Leo great ardor in the cause of piety.
Yeah, but now you're arguing against your own side. To quote something that I say to people all the time who get angry under my debate reviews, don't get mad at me for reporting what the other person said just because you like the other person. They're the ones who said it. Again, your side said it. So, I mean, deal with it. I don't know what to tell you.
How many heretics and corrupt men sat on the throne of Alexandria prior to Dioscorus, Arians, whatnot? But speaking of Dioscorus, St. Leo states, the Church of Alexandria, which has always been a house of prayer, is not now to be a den of robbers.
Hey, Thomas.
I have numerous other statements like this from the period under discussion that I will be presenting during the cross-examination. Regardless, when all of these men are taken into account, there are a lot of always and a lot of never, a lot of grand statements. And that style of rhetoric one encounters predominantly in societies that have not gone through an industrial revolution. Yet even now we rarely use always and we rarely use never to refer to a consistently positive or consistently negative event. So going back to the libellus of Hormisdas, the question is, was Pope St. Hormisdas really unaware of Pope?
He's arguing anti-hyperbole. I mean, yeah. We do it with Bible commentary all the time, where we're like, yes, it is an expression, but we're also taking it literal here. And you always see the anti-theists go, well, how do you know which one's literal and which one's metaphorical? Okay. I mean, I get it. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, but this is a Christian versus a Christian here arguing about documents. Whatever argument you're using here, and this is a Trent Horn point, has to be consistent when you then apply it to the Bible or you apply it to your own religion. If your own religion or your own belief system can't hold up to your own question, you got much bigger problems than whether or not the Pope is authoritative.
Popes who had failed to keep the faith unsullied. Was he really unaware of Pope Marcellinus,
Papal supremacy,
who had sacrificed to idols during the persecution of Pope St. Liberius, who signed an Arian confession and condemned St. Athanasius? Was he really unaware that Pope Felix II had been an Arian? Furthermore, even if he wasn't aware of those, he would be proven wrong 3 decades later when Pope Vigilius repeatedly flip-flopped on the condemnation of the 3 chapters, and the 7th century when Pope Honorius, writing in official capacity to Patriarch Sergius of Constantinople.
I feel like this is going to change from a papal debate to a debate over the 3 chapters. That's what I think is going to happen, because I've seen this too many times in all my debate reviews. You bring up a tangential issue that's contentious, and the whole debate gets derailed.
Endorsed monoenergism and monothelitism and was condemned by an ecumenical
Unless
council
Ibarra is very disciplined, but we'll see.
Doing so. We are faced with 3 options. St. Hormisdas was just incorrect. He didn't know. 2, he was lying or bluffing. Or 3, he used the term always the way that we use it, and he meant typically or tends to. I prefer the 3rd option. It was a Roman way to speak in general.
I was about to say something, Melissa, to keep going.
Sorry, it was a Roman way to speak in generalities. It is not that always simply has a different meaning in Latin and Greek than English, but rather that it carries the same meaning, and that is a tendency towards or generally yes. In fact, we can look at how I've used it today, or rather how I will. When I came in, I told Matt that I've always enjoyed Pints with Aquinas. There are some shows that I didn't, but almost all of them I did. Okay. If the audience were to peruse their own usage of the word, they would find that always almost never means every single instance.
This is bad apologetics, and this is also bad. Is a bad tactic. I've seen Dan do this on his channel when he starts trying to argue against definitions. This is stupid. Give your definition, argue for your version of the definition, that's fine. But to argue that the definition doesn't apply, or to argue that the way that the word usage is supposed to be used or is generally used doesn't apply, and here's the exception, because this exception is always available, that doesn't work, man. That doesn't work. You're trying to nuance whether someone killed someone or murdered someone. You know what I mean? Like this is a bad ploy. I've seen it too often in plenty of debates and just the online discussion. Don't make this a conversation about definitions. Stick to the topic. It's my first strike against you.
Okay. This is why Christ says, I'm with you always until the end of time. He has to qualify the always with until the end of time. But let us pretend that the libellus of Hormisdas does have Vatican I presuppositions behind it. One would then expect that the same bishops who had supposedly so eagerly signed it surely would not disregard the voice of the Pope on faith and morals in the future. But they did.
I'm at the 1 hour point. That's usually when my nose starts giving me problems. As soon as you finish this point, I'm going to put some nasal spray and we'll come right back to it.
Over the Theopauschite formula, in which Rome showed itself to be unfavorable to the Theopauschite formula and advocated against it. But the Eastern bishops, who were now in communion with Rome, insist on using it anyway. One might point out that there are currently many Catholic bishops who are in communion with Rome, yet they hold to degenerate morality. I mean, like the German bishop.
Again, that's not a disqualifier. That's not a disqualifier. Even ecumenical councils have decided that's not a disqualifier. You're going to have to go for something better than that. We are a church of sinners. We are not a church of saints. We become saints. That's why there's this church triumphant in heaven. But we're the church militant.
But if that is a parallel that can be drawn, what does that say about the bishops who in 519 could supposedly be cajoled into signing the libellus in the first place? Finally, we come to the fact that Vigilius was deposed from his office during the 7th session of the Fifth Ecumenical Council in 553.
Okay, so he's playing with numbers a little bit later than Ibada, so Ibada's safe there. And he's making some errors here in his presentation and in his choices. So while Ibada's process of an opening statement was a little underdeveloped and a little too broad, here this dude is he's making some false equivocations. And like I said, I don't know if he's just testing the waters to see which level Ibada can reject, because if he's already engaged with Ibada's book and he's already done other videos attacking Ibada, this might not be the best approach if you already know your opponent.
Quote, since therefore he, Vigilius, has acted in this way, we've pronounced that his name is alien to Christians as not to be read out in the diptycha. One may proudly point out that this was struck from the Acts.
This is all stuff that Ibada can agree with without, just like how some of Ibada's points just were irrelevant. This is all stuff that Ibada can agree with that won't hurt his claim of papal supremacy.
After Vigilius accepted the condemnation of the 3 chapters and was received back into communion by the East, but by pointing that out, you inadvertently admit that he had to submit to the judgment of his fellow bishops, something anathema to Vatican I. But Vigilius' condemnation
is
not
only anathema to Vatican I.
Compounded by the fact that earlier the North African bishops had also in fact excommunicated Vigilius for, as they saw it, wavering on Chalcedon. Now, you might argue that
Vatican I has to be in concert with all the other ecumenical councils. So if you have ecumenical councils going all the way up, before you get to the Lateran councils anyway, you have the first 7, and then you have the modern councils going from Vatican I, Vatican II, going from Trent to Vatican I, Vatican II. You have a theme, so it kind of averages out, so it pulls it back down. Not everything that's said in the council is going to be for all time and infallible. So there's some leveling that has to happen, and some settling that has to happen, and acceptance of the rulings. I feel you might be overestimating what papal authority is in order to undermine what papal authority is. Not so much straw manning, but a false still manning of papal authority and papal supremacy. Because as you said in the beginning, you're not even denying papal authority. So you're trying to exalt the Pope so you can knock him down. So you can say, oh, he exalted himself too high, higher than he's supposed to be allowed to go. Well, our argument is that no, the office already existed. He was already given the first among equals. He was already given the position of honor. And then as political and geopolitical realities changed, his office grew in power because nothing stays the same. Everything grows. But that growth of development is based on the seed, and the seed is foundational to the faith. Hence, he is the cornerstone.
This was outside of their rights and they were acting contra dogma, but you were forced to deal with the fact that there was, to our knowledge, absolutely no repercussions or repentance required of those bishops who had excommunicated him in the aftermath of the council or for centuries thereafter. It was simply accepted as a matter of fact that bishops could and did excommunicate a pope. And when Vigilius then accepted the condemnation of the 3 chapters, that the bishops could then admit the pope back into communion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ubi. With our opening...
Before we go on with that, let's give an estimate of how he did. I thought the opening of his opening, the first half of his opening was perfect. I think he put Ibarra in a bad position. Unfortunately, once he continued talking, he talked past his point and started making bad points. At first, my thought was that, okay, he's just trying to measure him out. But then he mentioned that he's really familiar with Eric Ibarra's arguments. So if he's truly familiar with them, then this testing out process cannot be why he chose these arguments. So either he's playing to his base and to his audience, or he's trying to incorporate bad arguments that have already been disputed and already been repudiated into his argument, so that way he can show that whatever prejudice or bias he has against the Catholic Church and against the Pope is based on historical precedents.
Statements out of the way, we're going to move into a time of rebuttals, each debater getting 20 minutes to respond to the other.
Okay, give me a second. Let me get my nasal spray and I'll be right back. All right. Let's keep going.
Eric, whenever you begin. I'll click the timer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Denny, for that. That was good. So the first thing I want to mention is the
Danny. The other guy's name is
multiple
Danny.
levels of patrinity or patrine primacy from bishop, from the local diocese upward.
I want to be very clear before we keep going. Both these gentlemen are more well read up on these topics than I am. I have read through the first 7 ecumenical councils. I haven't finished that reading because I went off into another project. I have read through all the modern councils, meaning from Trent onward, including Vatican I, Vatican II. I've read the supporting documents, the supplemental documents, and I've read a lot of the synods in between. I haven't read any of the Lateran councils, any of them. While I have read plenty of church documents, I have not read all the papal statements, and I'm still getting through church father writings, so there are church father writings I have not gotten to. Everything that's in the breviary and in the Liturgy of the Hours I have read of the church fathers, and all the writings up to, I think I'm up to Jerome, I'm at least familiar with. So I don't live in those documents, though. these people live in these documents. So I just want to give props to that. So while I'm familiar with this stuff and I've read through this stuff and I've read through all the major stuff, I have not read through everything. And even the stuff that I have read, I read it once. I read it, moved on, went to something else.
Leo does speak about a variety of levels. However, the first level, the bishop, the local bishop, has a peculiar set of prerogatives that the metropolitan does not have over his domain. And so it seems to me...
Interesting point. You're going to slice and dice between a bishop and a metropolitan. But could a metropolitan not be a bishop? A metropolitan has to be a bishop, right? So slicing hairs, but okay.
Quite reasonable that Leo would say that the top Petrine apex, the summit.
And like I said in a previous video, the Pope wears many hats, and sometimes when you're criticizing one hat, it's not necessarily the hat that we're talking about when we're talking about papal authority. So there's a difference between him being in charge of the Diocese of Rome, and there's a difference between him being in charge of the church that he runs, and there's a difference between him being the president of the or king, if you will, or emperor, if you will, of the Vatican City, and there's a difference between him being the Pope of the Catholic Church. Like, these are all different roles. There's a difference between him being a patriarch and him being the Pope. Like, these are different roles that he's playing here. Patriarch of the West is different than the Bishop of Rome. So, same person, same office, different hats, different authority. It would be like if the president was also a governor, was also the mayor. He just would have different powers and different levels of authority. And he's not always speaking, if he was the mayor, when he's acting as the mayor, he's not always speaking as the president. And when he's acting as governor, he's not always speaking as the president. When he's speaking as the president, he's not speaking as the governor or the mayor. These are complications, yes, but that doesn't make them untrue.
Of the church's government would have something unique that doesn't belong to patriarchs and metropolitans. And in order to be the universal principle of unity, which is what Leo said in that letter, which is, he said, no one should be at odds with Peter's seat. In order to have that kind of a prerogative, which is the power to unify the whole hierarchy, he has to be able to preside over the hierarchy. In other words, in order to be the principle of unity for the whole hierarchy, he has to be able to transcend the competition. Because a metropolitan and another metropolitan and another metropolitan, they're in a deadlock. Patriarch.
But you have nuns and mystics who have written to the Pope and gotten the Pope to submit to their ideas. Well, yes, that shows that doesn't mean that they have, just because he agrees with them or submits to their, or agrees with their opinion or submits to their opinion, that doesn't mean they have power over him. Yeah, that works. But that also means that he could also just be making a suggestion that happened to be followed. So this is tenuous. This is not a strong statement.
And another patriarch, they're in a deadlock. So in order to consolidate unity at the top has to have rights.
Well, yeah, he's the tiebreaker vote. But that's also already established in Orthodox ecclesiology.
That correspond to the ability to put division to an end. And the only way to put division to an end is to be unequal to the voices of the plural options. So there must be something unique about the universal Petrine head.
Well, first among equals would be equal by a little bit more.
Let's move on to Chalcedon. Yes, it is true. Chalcedon did use Nicaea as a standard, Ephesus 431 as a standard, Cyril's letters as a standard. But this was also Leo's perspective as well. And yet Leo, side by side with using prior dogmatic statements as a reference, as a criteria, he also said that the Council of Chalcedon was not at liberty to review his tome. And so from the point of Leo himself, and we know this from letter 33, letter 82, and it's testified by Richard Price, several Orthodox scholars, I can talk to them, I could bring those up later in the cross-exam, that Leo did not believe that his tome could be revised. The standards given were that his tome should be ratified, but that doesn't mean the option of revised. So he wants to see his tome fully ratified in the council and for the legal means to be employed by the Byzantine emperor and the imperial commissioners. After Chalcedon, he still insists on his tome being what was composed by Christ through the foremost see of Christendom. And letter 120, which is a famous letter that conciliarists have always appealed to, even in the second millennium going up to the Vatican I, you had Catholic theologians appealing to letter 120 of Leo, where he says head and members agreed in order to manifest that it came from Christ.
Which is what I was saying earlier. So this is fine. This is fine. So far, he's bringing up points that I brought up, so I'm going to agree with him.
Catholic theologians have said that it's a double guarantee. It's kind of like when you have in the Supreme Court, you have 5 in favor, 4 against. That's a minimum for a law to pass. But we all want consensus, 9-0. So Leo already believed that what was composed by Christ through the first see was sufficient to end the discussion. That's why all of his letters, he gives no liberty for the council to revise his letter. That's why at the Council of Ephesus 449, he simply dissolved it because it didn't employ his tome. So he had the authority to annul that council. He has the authority to ratify or annul Chalcedon, depending on whether it accepted his tome or it didn't. Okay, so then Vatican I. Okay, you said...
This is just a possible weakness, which is that, but then all sees have the ability to ratify, to agree or disagree with a council. Like, they still have to accept what the ruling is. That doesn't help your case.
Said that the burden is on me to find where the Pope alone, as an individual, isolated from everybody else, binds everybody in the church. The problem is, we don't need that. I don't need that. I don't have that burden. And here's why. Vatican I itself is a ecumenical council. Yep. It consisted of bishops voting, and it consisted of the Pope ratifying. So you don't have anything at Vatican I with the Pope acting in absolute isolation from anybody. And yet there isn't a soul on the earth who's going to doubt that at that council, the people believed in papal supremacy and papal infallibility. Nobody's going to go around with a scanner saying, yeah, but the Pope didn't say it by himself, so we can't really ascertain whether they believe that. So just by the fact of what they say about the Pope's prerogatives proves what they believed.
I think this can be used to hurt his argument or help his argument. But it's a fair point.
In the same way, when we go into the early church, we don't need to find, like I said in my opening, a Pope always acting alone, or even doing an instance by himself where he judges a patriarch or issues an exculpator decree. We don't actually need that. It's not the burden on top of me. The burden on top of me is simply to show that they believe that power resides in the apostolic see. Moving on, the Vatican I papacy exists in conciliar modes, or if the Pope decides to do something by himself. At the Council of Trent, for example, no historian I know denies that the papacy existed then in a papal supremacist form. Same goes for the Lateran councils, Lyons 1274, Florence, Vatican II. And yet at these councils, you see collaboration, you see votes, you see common deliberation. And yet nobody's going to look at that and say, yeah, but the papacy's not there because we didn't see the Pope do it by himself. So in the same way, we just go into the first millennium, use the same grid. Yeah, the Pope's doing things in synods. He's doing things with ecumenical councils. He's doing things with a consensus paradigm. But that doesn't mean that the papacy, as we understand it, wasn't there. So I don't have that burden. Just like I don't have the burden to prove that the Pope did anything by himself at Vatican I. He did things with a vote. 500 and some bishops voted in favor of Pastor Eternus.
Hold on, I got to check to see what time we go to work tomorrow. Give me a second.
Did those bishops believe in papal supremacy? Yes. Why? Well, we didn't see them allow the Pope to do it by himself, but they confessed that the Pope had those rights. So if we go to the early centuries and we see Pope Leo, Pope Hormisdas, all these popes saying that they have these rights, then that's enough to fulfill my burden in this debate. We'll move to Pope Felix III. Yes, Galasius said that Pope Felix III excommunicated Acacius and that it is a common right, but he was just covering his base. He goes on further in that very same letter to say that, well, that's just one thing to clear me. What I did is something that every bishop can do when you have an ecumenical council proceeding it. But then he moves on in the next paragraph and he says, well, wait a minute, you guys are all making a big shtick about canons, but the canons direct everything to the apostolic see for judgment. And then he says that the apostolic see can always, semper, always judge all prelates at any time, even on the sole authority of the apostolic see. So when he said that Felix III did this and that, excommunication as a prerogative that any bishop can do.
Yeah, it's already tomorrow.
He said, well, that's one reason why I can't be accused of any wrongdoing. But here are other reasons I can't be accused of wrongdoing. And that's when he goes in to speak about the sole right of the Pope to, with a synod proceeding or without one. And Dvorak speaks about this at length in his book, Apostolicity in Byzantium. He says the apostolic see has the right to do that. So the Easterners can't accuse Rome of wrongdoing in the excommunication of Acacius because, number one, every bishop can do this. But then he goes on to give other reasons. And those reasons are the ones that come into my side of the debate. Pope Hormisdas, yes, there was other libelli, but he made it very clear to Justinian and to Justin, Justinian, and the Patriarch of Constantinople that any libelli that's made has to conform to the tenor of the first one. So, if the papal claims in the first formula were intolerable for the Easterners, they made no opposition to that in their other libelli. Other libelli that they made simply fulfills the conditions that Hormisdas gave. If they thought it was heretical, they would have been outspoken against those claims, but they didn't.
That's an assumption.
Didn't make any kind of opposition to those claims. The only opposition they made was to the harsh subtraction of certain names from liturgical commemoration. So the papal claims in the original formula,
That's a caveat.
those were never contested. Now you might say, well, it was irrelevant. That's actually right. The issue at hand was Chalcedon and resurrecting the tomb of Leo in the East. How am I on time?
You have 9 minutes.
Okay. So always apostolic see in the track record. Yes, it's true. Always is not. It doesn't have to be in every single instance, as some of the examples you pointed out proves. But Rome had been known for this claim. I mean, Pope Gelasius made the claim. Pope Simplicius made the claim. There are contemporaries at this time that were making the claim quite concretely. Theodoret of Cyrus, for example, when he was adorning Rome with why is it that Rome is the first? And why is it that it has so much prestige? Theodoret said, because there has never been a heretic to sit on the throne of the Roman See. And he said that, right? Now, was he correct? That's a separate question. It's a separate question. It's what he understood. And what he understood was that there had not been a heretic who sat upon the papal throne.
That's a nuance.
The popes up to Hormisdas all claimed that the Roman See had been without blemish. Now, were they historically correct? That's a different question. The resolution
This rebuttal's a little bit weaker than its opening statement.
of this debate is, was Vatican I
Little bit, not terribly, but a little bit.
manifest in the 5th and 6th centuries? And as in my opening statement, if we find saints, councils, and with the help of scholarship, where people believe these things, they believe this is resident in the church, then my burden's fulfilled.
Fact over belief, my friend. You need facts.
Pope Vigilius,
Facts over opinions, anyway.
yes, he was excommunicated at the 7th session of the Council of Constantinople 553. However, that was struck from the Acts. You already anticipated that. And it does not mean that he submitted to the council. I would actually deny that. I would agree with Father Richard Price, who in his commentary on Vigilius says something quite different. So Vigilius wrote for his first constitution, giving like a half-hearted condemnation of the writings of Theodoret and Theodore, and then defending the letter of Ebus. Well, he revokes that later. In his second constitution, which is after the council, he has to annul his first constitution, which means he didn't believe that the council even subtracted from his first constitution.
Why does
so
he
he
talk
already
so
believed
slow?
that he was needed in order to annul
Again, this is 1.5, and he's talking this slow.
his first constitution. This is what Father Richard Price says about how Vigilius reacted to the council. Quote, he, Vigilius, could not have stated more unambiguously that his decree was final and left no room for discussion, since at the very same time an ecumenical council was in process of discussing the very same questions, he implied that his own authority surpassed that of any council. When he capitulated to imperial pressure and came to sign the second letter to Eutyches and the second constitutum, he in no way lessened his claims. He confirmed the decrees of the council, but he did not confirm its authority. Indeed, he made no mention of it at all. Instead, he took over its decrees and issued them in his own name. The names first and second constituta are modern and potentially misleading, for the second constitution was written not to supplement the first, but hopefully to expunge it from memory. At the same date, a new edition of the Conciliar Acts was produced, in which the reference to the first constitutum was removed. As a result, it was now the second constitutum rather than the first that was treated as fulfilling the promise to issue his own judgment on the chapters, close quote. So Vigilius ends up ratifying the council on his own terms. So he doesn't submit to the excommunication. In fact,
Yeah, but that could just show papal arrogance.
that's probably
Or-
why it was
Roman arrogance.
expunged from the Acts, is because he never came out and admitted he was wrong. In his letter to Eutyches and his letter in his second constitution, he compares his correction to Augustine of Hippo, who in his retractations he's not admitting, oh, I was a heretic before and I converted to the true faith. He's saying, no, I made various kinds of errors. And the historical errors that Vigilius made, which were errors of fact, we can get into that in the cross-examination. Vigilius at no point made any kind of heretical commitments. He comes around, he says, look, I've always held the faith of the church. That's what he says in his letter to Eutyches and in his second constitution. So he never admits to what the council said, which is he has proven himself to be a Nestorian. Vigilius doesn't agree with that. And so he comes back into the leadership of the council, according to the way the Acts are configured, without what was required of Theodoret at Chalcedon. He was required to anathematize Nestorius. Vigilius was not put under trial that way. So yes, the excommunication was expunged from the Acts, and so what the history of Byzantium looks at that council, they don't see that. What it looks like when you read the Acts of that council is that Vigilius didn't attend and then came in the end, and there was perfect cooperation between Pope and Emperor. The Western bishops who disciplined, they removed Vigilius from the diptychs. Yes, there were consequences to this. Pope Pelagius I, Pope Pelagius II, and Pope Gregory the Great, they dealt delicately with these people because of how confusing the Three Chapters controversy was, but they didn't relent in saying that by their removing Peter from the diptychs, they immediately went into schism. And so all these churches in the West, they eventually came back into communion with the church on terms, according to Rome, in a transition from schism back into unity, rather than just being fully regular churches in active opposition to Rome. So even the Western sees that didn't technically add 553 to their listings, because we have listings way past the 6th century where they don't include it. They weren't doing so in opposition to Rome, and they commemorated him in the liturgy. So those churches in the West that removed the Pope from the diptychs, they went into schism, and they had to fix that. Rome pled with them and argued in all kinds of ways that were accommodating, but the fact remains, those Western churches were opposing the ecumenical council and papal authority, and they had to fix it.
But then the question becomes, was the bigger issue them opposing the council, or was the bigger issue opposing the Church of Rome, or was the bigger issue them opposing the Pope or the papal office?
By coming out of schism.
2 minutes.
Okay, I'm done.
It'll take as much time as you'd like.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say. I mean, there's quotations from a few scholars, but it's not going to give me the time in 2 minutes.
No, you can take as much time as you like. I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So let's see. The formula for mistas. If you read it in isolation, you can read it in a way that it's stripped of import. But when you read it against the backdrop of the claims of Leo, Gelasius, Simplicius, Symmachus, and popes going forward like Agatho, they're all looking at these Petrine prerogatives as a way that are divinely protecting the Roman See. Even Catholics today would not say that means that popes are completely protected from every kind of error. So the always terminology, that's something that we can absorb as Catholics too, because popes have erred, and we do agree that Honorius was condemned. Ecumenical councils say that. So I don't think the formula and the anathema of Honorius, for example, are at odds with each other.
All right, thanks very much. Ubi, you have 20 minutes to your rebuttal, whenever you begin.
All right, let's look at the rebuttal real quick. He hit back on everything, and while I do think he hit the ball every time, I don't think he hit it out of the park every time. I think there was only maybe one where he hit it out of the park. For the most of them, they were just hits down the field. He was putting players on bases. I don't think any of them were home runs. And I think he not admitted, but consented? Something with a C-O-N. Anyway, he was like, yeah, okay, I'll let that go. So I thought his opening statement was better. I thought the rebuttal was effective, but not memorable and not extraordinary. Not amazing. So we have a case for the Pope exercising power, and we have a case for the ecumenical councils agreeing that the Pope has power, although he didn't go about it the way that I wish that he would. Master Blaster, hey, Merry belated Christmas and all that. Same thing, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah.
Okay. So you bring up a point that I want to handle right away, and that is you state that a metropolitan has certain juridical rights, or rather a bishop has certain juridical rights in his own diocese that a metropolitan does not have over a bishop. That's an argument I've heard you guys bring up quite a bit. The problem with that is this: if you have pope and then you have patriarch and then you have archbishop, you have metropolitan, you have bishop. But then if you're comparing...
This is what I brought up earlier. This is exactly what I brought up earlier. So you have the Pope as metropolitan, the Pope as patriarch, the Pope as bishop, the Pope as priest of his own church. So you have 4 different levels of authority that he can speak from. So he's exactly going into that. Hello, BS. How you doing? I hope you're not too sleepy. This might help you sleep a little bit if you need to.
Well, why is it, bishop has...
Slow it down to 0.75 and just take a nap.
immediate jurisdiction over his priest, but a metropolitan doesn't have it over a bishop. The reason is because the priests are not bishops. We're talking about ranks within the episcopacy. So if you're saying a pope has the rights over bishops, a bishop has over his priests, there's no consistency between, say, patriarch to archbishop, archbishop to metropolitans, metropolitans to bishops. I've covered that in a video called "What's Wrong with Papal Infallibility." You mentioned that he's appealed
He's wrong there.
to Rome. You appealed to others. St. Leo responding to critics saying that the Peter's Confession as the tome. St. Leo, in a number of letters, comments that the tome itself was just an explication on the confession. He actually thought that nothing should be done. They should just simply quote the Council of Nicaea because it speaks of Christ as being homoousios with humanity. So let's see. You stated that St. Leo saw his tome as a measuring stick of theology. Well, St. Cyril believed the 12 chapters to be a measuring stick of theology. You also confused auctoritas and potestas. Auctoritas was a certain clout that you'd have. It also meant ratification. For example, the Senate would ratify a consul who they would use their auctoritas to ratify a council, or a consul who would then use potestas, which is actual juridical authority. It also meant witness. For example, you hear people say the Bible
He's
has
kind of taking an authoritative tone, which I don't appreciate, but that's okay.
auctoritas because it's a witness to the events that it describes. To be a good witness, you have to have a good measure of reputation. Let's see here what else we have. You stated that St. Justinian tried to circumvent the rules of the church. Would you say that St. Justinian was, I mean, to me that makes it sound like you're saying that he was not necessarily helpful at all times to the church, which I want to just make note of that. I would like to see those quotations from St. Gregory on St. Symmachus. You comment on multiple levels of paternity. I handled that already. Bishops' jurisdiction over priests is not the same as that of metropolitans over bishops. And you state that the Pope has to be able to put down division, so he needs this massive amount of power. How's that working out for you guys right now?
Easy. Great.
It's not. It's a failed system.
No, it's not. It's a perfect system.
I don't believe that Jesus Christ makes failed systems.
It's a great system. You're just mad because we have a pope and you don't. You're welcome to come back to the Catholic Church and you can have a pope too.
Maybe other people do. I don't. You stated Leo thought Chalcedon was not at liberty to judge his tome. I mean, again, letter 120 says it.
I don't like that so many people try to appeal to the rat trads. The rat trads are not in good standing with the church. Especially the ones who are in schism, they're literally excommunicating themselves out of the church by being in schism with the Pope. So, sorry, you don't have a good point there. Just because you want to take the side of the radical traditionalists doesn't mean you have a good point. It actually means that you're on the side of the heretics. So congratulations, you mooted your own point.
Right out, it ratified the tome. It's received by the whole judgment of the church. I mean, even here in the Acts, I mean, it's like page after page after page of them stating that they judged the tome. Let me see here. Let me just read some of
I mean, I can do that too. You want me to pull out a book? I can pull out a book.
these. I'm trying to find this here. Fourth session, I believe. Okay, so you see these statements, and this is from the fourth session, where the bishops are like, John, the most devout bishop of so-and-so, according to my understanding, the meaning of the letter of the most holy Leo, Bishop of Rome, accords with the Creed of 318 and the 150 who subsequently assembled at Constantinople, with the decrees of Ephesus relating to the deposition of the impious Nestorius, and under the leadership of the most blessed Cyril, and I have subscribed to the same letter. Or you'll see these statements like, Patricius, the most devout bishop of Tiana, said, we have found the letter of the most holy Leo, Archbishop of Rome, to be in harmony with the 318 at Nicaea and with the 150 holy fathers who met subsequently at the imperial city, and I have signed. Or of Eusebius, the most devout bishop of Dorylaeum, he's a prominent figure at Chalcedon, he goes, I judge the letter of the most holy Leo, Archbishop of Senior Rome, to be in accord with the definition of the 318 who assembled at Nicaea, with the council of the 150 who assembled in the great city of Constantinople, and with the council that took place at Ephesus under Blessed Cyril, and I have signed it. You have another one here, Mariano.
This is a pointless point. You have people agreeing and submitting to the rule of a pope. You're proving nothing. You need to have a saint or a bishop who wasn't excommunicated saying, which is a saint anyway, because but anyway, you have to have a pope and a bishop in good standing who says no to the document and stayed in good standing and died in good standing and was never excommunicated even after his death. That's what you have to find.
As Bishop of Synata, he says, accords with Ephesus, accords with Nicaea, and therefore I have signed it. Another one, Epiphanius. As I could recognize from the reading of the letter.
Again, if they're signing it, they're submitting to it. Like, I don't understand where you're getting the word wrong. This is a bad argument. This is bad. This is not good. This is not Cliff bad, but I mean, this is still bad.
God beloved Leo, it agrees in meaning with the definition of the 318 Fathers. In fact, there's about 20 pages of this. That sounds like a judgment. That doesn't sound like, well, I submit to the Holy Fathers. Like, no, I judge this to be true. They're putting it through the ringer. Now, were they free to just edit it down? No, you're not free to edit down someone else's statement. They have to edit it for themselves. And St. Leo inadvertently does that by writing later on the so-called second tome, where he clarifies what he meant because there are parts of the tome that are poorly worded. There are parts of it that are very poorly worded. You comment on Vatican I, you state that you confuse the Pope.
Is he Orthodox or is he Radtrat? I'm seriously getting mixed messages here on where he's actually at. Is he a schismist? Is he a schismer?
Being approved to speak infallibly with the Pope speaking infallibly. Okay. So, I find it ironic that you state that we don't have, like looking in the first millennium for examples of the Pope acting on his own is some sort of distortion. And you take this minimalist approach, but there would be no reason to create a so-called minimalist approach to the evidence if the so-called maximalist approach worked. But because you turn the maximalist approach, that being the claims of Vatican I, are largely impossible to prove.
None of this was introduced in the actual debate, so this is bad form on his behalf, because now he's going after Ibada's writings and Ibada's previous material and assuming the audience has come along for the ride, which we have not.
From the historical data, you have to move the goalposts by dumbing down the standard and admit the otherwise move the goalpost by dumbing down the standard and admit the disqualification of your own position. If you can bring up all these examples of Vatican I, the first.
So if he wrote these notes while Ibada was speaking, fine. If he wrote down these notes before the debate, bad form.
Millennium, why wouldn't you? I would. If I could do it, I'd be Catholic. I'd still be Catholic. I'm not, but that's just me.
So he is a schismatic. We got that. And he's an apostate.
Let's see what else. Okay, you talk about St. Galasius. He says the canons direct everything towards Rome. That is correct. I just so happen to have a book that you probably have as well.
Yeah.
It's an excellent book. Okay. He does comment on that in letter. Let's read this. But as for Euphemius, who says that Achachius could not have been condemned by one person, I'm surprised if he does not realize his own ignorance himself. Yes, he does not realize that Achachius was condemned according to the formula of the Synod of Chalcedon. Does he not know, or is he pretending not to know? By that formula particularly, it is agreed that the instigators of Achachius' error were condemned by a majority vote of bishops. Just as a clear consideration of events shows, to have been done and is being done in the case of every single heresy from the beginning of the Christian religion, and that my predecessor was appointed executor of the old ordinance, not the instigator of a new regulation. It is permissible not only for an apostolic leader, but for every pontiff to separate from Catholic communion whomsoever they like in whatever place they like, according to the rule of the very heresy that has previously been condemned. Indeed, Achachius was not the inventor of a new, and he goes on, okay. Then he comes to this part, he goes, against us they oppose the canons. While they do not know what they are talking about, they make known that they themselves are against the canons by the very fact that they avoid obeying the first see when it recommends what is sound and right. They are the very canons that intend the referral of appeals from the entire church to the see for examination. He's referring to the Sardican canons. But that these people have ordained henceforth on no occasion should be appealed by the see. So once someone appeals to, with the Sardican canons, if Rome goes, no, this person deserves a retrial, you can't say, no, they don't. You have to give them the retrials. That's part of the system. I mean, we don't want to be Somalia, right? There are rules. Okay? But that these people have ordained henceforth on no occasion should be appealed to see. And by this means, the canons have instructed that this see is to sit in judgment on the entire church, to pass nobody's judgment, nor ever to be judged by its judgment. And they've determined that its verdict should never be undone, and ordered instead that its decisions are to be followed. He says that in the...
Again, within his quote, there are defeaters to his argument. They shall never be undone. That sounds like infallibility to me.
Context of the Sardican canons. And in this very case, Timothy of Alexandria and Peter of Antioch, Peter, Paul, John, and the rest, not just one, but certainly several bearing the title of bishop, were deposed by the sole authority of the apostolic see. Even Achachius himself, who is conspicuous as a creator of this injunction, is a witness. This fact is clear that just as in particular the apostolic see did this in conformity with the formula of the synod.
So this is just again, we're doing this off the cuff. I have no research in front of me. he's letting his bias against the Catholic Church and his emotional emotional resistance to the Pope color his tactics and his thinking. So he's reading a source, but because he doesn't like the Pope, he's reading it in a way that's against the Pope. That doesn't work. He needs to be reading it unbiasedly. That doesn't mean that reading it unbiasedly is going to bring him over to my side or over to Ibada's side, but he's so entrenched that he doesn't see the wood from the trees here, the forest from the trees.
Synod. So it is most certain that nobody could resile from it. So part of synodality is that once the head of the synod signs off on something, okay, the members present it to him, he signs off on it, it's law then. Okay, yeah, you can't just say like, well, we're not going to go with what the head of the synod says after he's approved it. But in the case you're talking about, referring to
Yeah, but listen to that again. The but is the problem here. You have to include a but to get to your point.
Okay, the members present it to him, he signs off on it, it's law then. Okay, yeah, you can't just say like, well, we're not going to go with what the head of the synod says after he's approved it. But in the case you're talking about, referring to Archon Canons. And so yes, in order to undo something that Rome states in the context of a synod, in order to undo a council that the head of the synod approves, you need the head of the synod to undo it with you. That's
a huge admission, dude. That's a huge admission. Let's make it bigger. Can you undo Nicaea? Can you undo Chalcedon? Can you? Because if you can, we're out of the realm of orthodoxy altogether. Orthodoxy, little o. We're just out. Dogma's done. If we can undo the ecumenical councils that every single church that's part of the original Catholic Church affirms. The actual real Catholic Church, the one body of Christ, the two lungs, and the new appendage that we grew in Russia. Like, if Coptic, if Syrian, if all the churches, all the patriarchs, just if they're all down and all the bishops are down and everything's yes, and we can now undo it, we don't have dogma. We have the Protestant Bible. That's it. Like, what are you arguing for? I get it. You think the Pope developed, the power of the Pope developed after the ante-Nicene Fathers wrote. I get that. I get that's what you're saying. I get that the approvals and the ascensions and the submissions are happening because dogmatic law had already begun and doctrinal law had already begun and canon law had already begun, and these precursors to the modern understanding of church rule already have these laws established. They're universal throughout the church. Therefore, there's no authority? I mean, that sounds like you're arguing for authority. Oh, there's no authority because it has a head, and the head happens to be who's ever in charge. And so when it's Alexandria, it's Alexandria. When it's Rome, it's Rome. When it's Egypt, it's Egypt. Or Alexandria, it's Alexandria. But all of these are acting in concert, and they're all using Rome as the tiebreaker. So it still makes Rome special. Maybe it's not special in the way that we think, but it's definitely more special than the way that you're arguing for.
Conciliar theory. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
You sure? You got 8 minutes and 20 seconds. I don't want people to say
we're right. We're on the same.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
If you
Yeah, actually, there's a few more. Did St. Hormisdas say all libelli need to be... My handwriting is so bad. To confirm to papal claims. Okay. Yeah, I really do believe that he left out of the requirements the papal claims because they were just chest thumping. They were just rhetoric. I mean, if they were really that crucial, why did he just remove them? It's not like, say, the Eucharist, which he just didn't even mention to begin with, but suddenly these just disappear. It's not that people would need to...
What did he just do? What did he just say? He is Orthodox, right? What was that? What did he just say?
the papal claims because they were just chest thumping, they were just rhetoric. I mean, if they were really that crucial, why did he just remove them? It's not like, say, the Eucharist, which he just didn't even mention to begin with, but suddenly these just disappear. It's not that people would need to oppose them, it's that they just understood them to be rhetoric. I mean, keep in mind, they know their own cultures fairly well.
That's an assumption. And again, you could also make the other one, which they didn't mention it because they just assumed it to be true. I don't have to tell you not to speed. If I tell you, hey, John was arrested yesterday. Oh, yeah, what happened? He was going 50 in a school zone. You can just assume the school zone is 20 miles an hour. You don't need me to explain how speed laws work in school zones. Like it's accepted. It's known.
In the same way that you say, like, oh, I always, whatever. I know you don't every single time. No.
Again, that's a bad semantic argument.
And about Vigilius reissuing the decrees of the council in his own name. Yeah, he'd been absolutely humiliated. He was desperately trying to save face. And Vigilius was a horrible person.
Again, that has nothing to do with authority.
Awful. He had his predecessor starved to death.
Again, that has nothing to do with authority.
Not even I would do that. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say that about myself, but I'd like to think I wouldn't. But anyway, you state that Vigilius never states he was wrong. Again, he was desperately trying to save face. I mean, he had just been humiliated by a council.
Again, that has nothing to do with it. That's completely unrelated to whether or not he had authority. A king can be a terrible person and still be king. So this whole argument is nonsensical. This portion right here is nonsensical. The moral argument for authority is ridiculous.
What's he going to do? I'm sorry, guys, I really screwed you. You have a lot of these bishops, like Theodoret. Theodoret, it's not until he's absolutely forced to by Chalcedon that he actually anathematizes his friend Nestorius. He tried to fly under the weather. I think at the end of the council, they were like, all right, Vigilius learned his lesson. He's on the same page now. Just let it go. Okay. The consequences to North Africa for excommunicating the Pope. Yeah, they rejected the Fifth Council. It was a schism of the three chapters. It wasn't until the 7th century that it was actually healed. Was it 7th, 8th? Yeah. That it was actually healed, that schism.
But the schism was healed.
Up into the early 700s, but I'm not sure. So it sounded like you were confusing the consequences of excommunicating the Pope for a stance on the three chapters initially with the penalties for actually rejecting the Fifth Ecumenical Council. That's what it sounded like to me. And you can comment on that later. And I'm done. I got 5.5 minutes left. So
All right.
maybe we can add that to the 50 minutes at the end.
Yeah, if it's going well, we will. All right, thanks very much for your opening and rebuttals, guys. Really appreciate it. We are going to take a really quick break, and when we come back, we're going to have 15 minutes of cross-examine each, followed by 50 minutes of open dialogue. So this will obviously be the more entertaining.
Wait, 50 or 55.3?
55.3. Thank you very much for the correction in the open dialogue.
Okay, so that's it. Tomorrow, if this gets good enough views, tomorrow we'll continue. Let's say 100 views. We get 100 views by tomorrow, we will do this again. Let's see. All right, I got to work out. I got to go to bed. I have work tomorrow. Let's go to the big screen. So let's get back to my normal outro instead of the last few days of being silly. Remember that God forgives you, so you should forgive everyone. And that God loves you, so you should love everyone. That means love your neighbor, love your enemy, love your brother, and love yourself. And that means forgive everyone. Forgive your enemy, forgive yourself, forgive your family. And above all, love God. All right, have a great night. Here comes the music.
Growing up, parents got me a guitar. Said you could do anything, kid, you could go far. You could be the president, fireman, race cars. The sky's the limit, kid, so shoot for the stars. So I strummed that guitar every day. Found a passion for music, never went away. I joined a couple bands and played a few shows. Tried to impress the girl in the front row. But soon enough, everything starts to change. As you grow up, nobody treats you the same. They try to take your future and make it real safe. You could be a doctor, accountant, or something sane. But yo, whatever happened to the sky was the limit. I fell in love with music, never thought it was a gimmick. I worked so hard on every tune and every single lyric. My whole identity depended on being artistic. Now you wanna strip that away so you feel okay? Cause if I make it to the top, what does that really say? That you shouldn't have given up, that you made the mistake? But if I fail, you feel much better about picking your lane, right? Yeah, things are gonna get better real soon. Yeah, I'ma just do me, you just do you. I swear it's gonna get better real soon. Don't let anyone tell you what you should do. I got a clear view. We're gonna make it soon. Just keep pushing through. You're what you got to lose. You're what you got to lose. You're what you got to lose. Just keep pushing through. Cause what you got to lose. 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 I won't give up, I won't back down until the line sinks in underneath the deep ground. I won't give up, I won't back down. There's nobody stopping me except for me now. I won't give up, I won't back down until the line sinks in underneath the deep ground.